Hi, my name is Julia, and I'm 34 years old. For most people, that simple introduction would carry warmth, an invitation to know them better. But for me, it has always felt like a defense, a shield I had to raise against people who preferred to erase me. I am not just Julia, the daughter or the sister they conveniently forgot about. I am Special Agent Julia of the FBI, and every scar I carry tells a story that my family never wanted the world to hear. The invitation arrived on a Thursday afternoon. It was plain enough, a white envelope with embossed edges, my full name printed neatly on the front. I stared at it for almost an hour on the corner of my desk in Washington, D.C. It looked harmless, almost polite, but I knew what it carried inside. My sister, Megan, was getting married. And the man she was marrying was Jason, the same man whose life I once saved during a high-risk FBI operation years ago. The irony cut deeper than any bullet wound I'd ever seen. My family hadn't spoken to me in 6 years. Not a single phone call, not for birthdays, not when I nearly lost my life in the line of duty. Nothing but silence. And now, out of nowhere, they were asking me to show up as though I had never been erased. On the back of the invitation, written in my mother Brenda's tight, unforgiving script, were just 2 words: behave. I sat in my apartment, the faint hum of city traffic below my window, and turned the envelope over in my hands. FBI files, surveillance photos, coded reports. These were the things I was trained to dissect. But this was different. This was family. And family had always been the battlefield where I carried the deepest wounds. I could still remember the last time I saw them clearly. My father's funeral, rows of uniforms, flags folded with precision, the air heavy with silence. Yet no one had saved me a seat. My mother never even looked at me. My sister smiled faintly, like I was just an unwelcome stranger. And when I stood in uniform, they whispered that I was trying to upstage the family. That was the day I walked away. Now here I was, years later, staring at a wedding invitation that threatened to drag me back into the very world that had disowned me. But I wasn't the same woman I had been 6 years ago. I had built a career on discipline, justice, and survival. I wasn't going back to beg for recognition. If I went, I would go as the woman I had become, an FBI agent who no longer needed their approval. Still, one question gnawed at me as I slid the invitation into my desk drawer. Was I ready to face them? Was I going to this wedding to fight a war, or to finally bury a ghost? When I finally lay down that night, sleep never came. Instead, the memories returned, the mission that had bound Jason and me together in a way no family tie ever could. It had been 3 years earlier, deep into an FBI Joint Task Force operation. Intelligence had flagged a warehouse in Richmond as a hub for smuggled weapons tied to an extremist cell. My team had been tasked with surveillance and eventual entry. Jason, then a field analyst on temporary assignment, had been sent along to observe, though he wasn't trained for frontline danger. The night unraveled faster than any briefing had predicted. A hidden device, crude but deadly, was wired beneath the warehouse floor. We'd barely stepped inside when the detector screamed, and then everything slowed. The sharp crackle of radios, the balked orders, the heavy weight of realization. Jason had stepped squarely on a pressure plate. One wrong move, and he wouldn't leave alive. "Don't move," I told him, my voice lower than a whisper but carrying all the weight of command. His face was pale, sweat dripping down his temple, his eyes darting to mine like a man waiting for his final prayer. I dropped to the floor, gravel biting into my elbows as I crawled closer. My training screamed at me to wait for the bomb squad, but there wasn't time. Every second felt like a countdown only I could hear. My fingers shook as I worked, tracing wires, assessing circuits. Each breath tasted like metal and fear. Jason swallowed hard. "Julia, if this goes wrong..." "Shut up," I cut him off, my eyes fixed on the mess of wires. "You're not dying on my watch." I'd disarmed devices before, but never this close. Never with someone staring down at me like I was the only thread holding his life together. The world shrank to the sound of my heartbeat and the click of the final mechanism sliding free. The pressure plate released with a dull metallic snap. For a second, Jason's knees buckled. Then he inhaled, ragged and alive, tears burning in his eyes. "I owe you," he whispered. "I never wrote it in my report. It was easier to leave out the details, to file it as routine. But Jason never forgot. Neither did I. And now, the man whose life I had saved was about to marry my sister. The same sister who had done everything she could to erase me. The irony wasn't lost on me. It was cruel, precise, almost surgical. As I sat on my bed, staring at the faint glow of the invitation still sitting on my desk, I realized the truth. I wasn't just flying home for a wedding. I was flying back into a storm I'd tried to outrun my whole life. The flight to Virginia felt longer than any overseas mission I had ever taken. Not because of the distance but because of the weight pressing on my chest. The moment I landed and stepped into the arrivals hall, I already regretted answering the invitation. I rented a car and drove toward my mother's neighborhood. Early spring sunlight spilled across the streets of Alexandria, where dogwoods and cherry blossoms painted the sidewalks in pink and white. The place looked like a postcard, like a neighborhood untouched by bitterness. But I knew better. Behind those polished shutters and trimmed hedges lay the very battlefield I had avoided for 6 years. When I turned into the cul-de-sac, my chest tightened. There it was, my childhood home. Too perfect. Too staged. The paint on the shutters was fresh, the driveway spotless, the garden trimmed within an inch of its life. It was the kind of house that screamed of control, of image, of a family desperate to look whole from the outside. I rang the bell. The familiar smell hit me before the door fully opened. Lemon polish. My mother, Brenda, always believed a spotless house erased the filth of secrets. She stood in the doorway, dressed in beige slacks and a pearl-colored blouse, her hair pulled tight, not a strand out of place. Her eyes ran over my FBI-issued suit jacket, her lips pressing into that sharp, disapproving line I knew too well. "Julia," she said, her voice clipped, as though even my name tasted bitter. "Please don't ruin this for Megan." Not hello. Not welcome home. Just another warning. I didn't answer. Silence had always been my sharpest weapon around her. Inside, the dining room was already set, gleaming under the chandelier. 15 chairs around a polished table. One battlefield disguised as family tradition. Uncle Thomas sat near the head of the table, chatting lightly with Scott, my cousin, as though everything was perfectly normal. When their eyes flicked toward me, they nodded politely, but quickly returned to their small talk, as if I were nothing more than background noise. And then I saw Megan. My sister, the bride-to-be, perched gracefully on her chair in a silk blouse, her laughter too loud, her smile too rehearsed. She glanced at me, eyes glinting with satisfaction, then quickly looked away. It was the same performance she had given since childhood. Innocent on the surface, ruthless underneath. My seat was waiting at the far end of the table. Not beside Megan. Not in the middle where I might be seen in the family photos that would surely be taken later. No, mine was tucked away near the sideboard. Close enough to hear but far enough to be forgotten. A deliberate placement. I pulled the chair out. It creaked loudly in the silence. For a moment, all eyes flicked toward me, then just as quickly moved away. No one said, "Julia's back." No one said, "She came home." Instead, Brenda raised her glass and forced a smile. "To family," she announced. "To new beginnings," Uncle Thomas added. "To Megan and Jason," Scott chimed in. No mention of me. Not even a word. Just blank space where acknowledgement should have lived. I took a sip of water and leaned back in my chair. I wasn't there to beg for a seat at their table. I was there to remind them that I had built my own. The church was beautiful. I'll give them that. White lilies framed the altar, soft violin strings drifted from the speakers, and stained glass windows bathed the pews in golden light. Everything was curated to perfection, every detail designed to make Megan's day look flawless. Except for me. My name wasn't even on the seating chart in the foyer. Guests scanned the board easily, laughing, pointing out their tables. I searched row after row until finally, near the bottom corner, I found it, table 12. Near the fire exit. Out of sight. Out of the photographs. Out of the family. At the ceremony, I stood back, watching as Megan floated down the aisle in her white gown. Jason stood tall, polished, unreadable. For one brief second, his eyes flicked toward me. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just looked, and then looked away. When the priest called for close family to step forward for the blessing, my instincts carried me to rise. But before I could take a step, I felt my mother's hand lightly press against my arm. Brenda's voice was barely a whisper. "Let's not confuse things. This is Megan's day." So I sat back down. And for the first time in years, I felt like a ghost. The reception was worse. My table was tucked behind a pillar near the catering door. My place card printed in small font without my title. Everyone else's napkin was ivory. Mine was a shade paler, as if even fabric refused to match me. Across the ballroom, Megan glowed under the chandeliers. She laughed, twirled, posed for photographs as if the entire event had been choreographed around her. Brenda stood proudly nearby, her hand on Jason's arm, claiming a piece of the spotlight that wasn't hers. The toasts began. Smiles, laughter, glasses raised high. And then Megan took the microphone. "To think," she said sweetly, her eyes sweeping the room, "even my big sister made it here tonight. All the way from wherever she's stationed now. Guarding doors for greatness, no doubt." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Sharp, cutting laughter that sliced deeper than any insult could. My jaw tightened, but I didn't move. Then Brenda's voice carried across the room. "She's the shame of this family, but at least she made it on time." The room tilted. Guests chuckled, some uncomfortably, some with open delight. I rose slowly. Not in anger, not rushed, but steady, like something inevitable was unfolding. My glass still in my hand. My silence louder than their laughter. And across the room, Jason was watching me. He hadn't laughed. He hadn't smiled. His gaze was locked on mine, steady, deliberate. The kind of look that carried weight. Megan's smile faltered for the first time. Just a fraction. Enough for me to see the crack. She lifted the microphone again. "Oh, come on," she said, forcing a laugh. "It's a joke. Lighten up, Julia. You always took everything too seriously." But the room was already shifting. The performance was about to break. The laughter still lingered in the air when Jason set down his glass. He moved deliberately, each step carrying across the ballroom like a drumbeat no one had rehearsed. Conversation stilled mid-sentence, utensils froze midair, photographers swung their lenses toward the shift. He stopped in front of me, 1 pace away. Then he did something no one expected. He straightened his shoulders, lifted his hand, and gave me a sharp, precise salute. Not the casual nod of a relative, not the polite gesture of a groom, but the formal recognition of respect from one agent to another. "Ma'am," Jason said, his voice steady, carrying through the stunned silence, "please forgive my wife." The room gasped. Not whispers. Gasps. Audible, collective, as if every tuxedo and gown suddenly lost its starch. Jason turned then, his voice still clear enough for the entire hall to hear. "This woman is Special Agent Julia of the FBI. My commanding officer once, and the one who saved my life during an operation none of you will ever read about in the papers." The weight of his words cracked the room open. Glasses stilled mid-toast. Smiles faltered. Cameras flashed nervously, trying to catch a moment that wasn't on the schedule. Across the room, Megan's hand shook. The microphone slipped from her fingers and clattered against the floor with a hollow thud. Her face drained pale, her lips parted in shock. My mother, Brenda, rose to her feet so quickly she knocked over her champagne flute. "Julia," she began, her voice trembling, "this is not..." But she stopped. Because no one was listening to her anymore. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick, alive, filled with the weight of every year they had dismissed me, every slight, every whisper of shame they had attached to my name. And now that same name echoed back at them with a force they couldn't contain. At one of the front tables, Harrison, my old colleague, rose quietly and adjusted his suit. He didn't say a word. He just nodded once in my direction. Behind him, Colonel Davis, now Section Chief Davis of the Bureau, stood as well. Then Colonel Anderson. Then General Carter. One by one, they rose, not with noise, but with the unshakable dignity of acknowledgement. A line of recognition cut through the ballroom like a blade. I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Jason lowered his salute, stepped back, and left the moment with me. The family who had spent years erasing me now sat frozen, forced to face a truth they could no longer deny. For the first time, the silence belonged to me. The ballroom never recovered after Jason's salute. People tried to fill the silence with chatter, but their voices cracked, their laughter too thin to cover what had just happened. Megan sat pale and trembling, and Brenda's lips pressed into a line so tight I thought her face might crack. I didn't stay long. I had no interest in dancing or pretending. The point had already been made.
and it would echo far louder than anything I could say.
Later that night, Brenda asked to speak with me. She chose the hotel lounge, the kind of dimly lit space reserved for wealthy guests who liked their shame hidden in shadows. She sat across from me, posture perfect, pearls glinting under the low light, but her hands betrayed her, trembling slightly as they wrapped around a cold cup of untouched coffee. "You certainly made a statement tonight," she began, her voice too smooth, too rehearsed. I said nothing. She shifted in her chair. "The media is already buzzing. Not all of it flattering. You caught us off guard, Julia. No one was prepared for that." I leaned back, arms crossed. "You erased me for 6 years. You never once asked if I was alive. And now you want me to manage your reputation." Her jaw tightened. "I did what I thought was best. Protecting the family name isn't easy. You've always been loud." "I wasn't loud," I said, my voice low but sharp. "I was visible. And you punished me for it." For the first time, her eyes flickered, her control slipping. But before she could respond, a new voice cut in. "Megan." She stood at the edge of the lounge, sunglasses still perched on her head, her smile brittle, her body trembling with anger barely disguised as composure. She slid into the booth across from me, beside Brenda, and forced a laugh.
"Well," she exhaled, "that was dramatic."
I stayed silent. "Look," she continued, "I went too far tonight. The jokes about you being a guard, they were just that, jokes. Honestly, I didn't think." "That's the problem," I interrupted. My hands folded calmly on the table. "You never think." Her smirk faltered, but she tried again. "Fine. Maybe I was jealous. You've always had the spotlight, Julia. Dad's favorite. The golden agent. I just wanted a chance to breathe." I slid a folder across the table. The FBI watermark shone faintly under the dim light. Megan hesitated before opening it. Inside was a printout of an anonymous complaint, filed 7 years ago, accusing me of falsifying case reports and exaggerating my role in the Richmond operation. Her eyes widened. "That tip stalled my first promotion," I said evenly. "My file went dark for almost a year. No charges, no explanation. Just silence. Until now." "That could have been anyone," she said quickly, her voice rising. "Except it wasn't." I pulled out the second page, the results of a forensic linguistic analysis. 96% match. Even your old-school essay word choice gave you away. Irregardless. The color drained from her face. Brenda shifted uncomfortably beside her. "You tried to bury me so you could shine brighter," I said. My voice didn't shake. "But you forgot one thing, Megan." Her eyes darted up, fear and fury colliding. "What?" "I don't burn out. I burn." The silence that followed was heavier than anything in that ballroom. I stood, leaving the folder on the table. Neither of them moved to stop me. The morning after the wedding, I packed my bag and headed for the airport. I thought I'd leave quietly, slip back into my world without giving them another second of my energy. But life never lets you leave quietly when the truth has already been set free. At the TSA checkpoint, the flashes started. Reporters. Phones. Cameras. Voices calling my name. "Agent Cole, is it true your sister mocked you during her wedding? Did Jason serve under your command? Do you plan on pressing charges against your family for defamation?" I could have ignored them. I'd done it before. But something inside me shifted. I'd spent years being erased, at funerals, at weddings, at every family gathering where my name was treated like poison. I wasn't going to let them write the narrative again. I spotted a small podium near the side of the hall, one of those flimsy stands used for community announcements. I walked straight to it, turned to face the reporters, and let the weight of silence hold them still until every lens pointed my way. "I know why you're here," I began, my voice steady, deliberate. "You want a quote, a reaction, a headline. So here it is. I am not my family's failure. I am their silence made visible." The hall stilled. Pens froze above notepads. The reporters leaned closer. For years, I served my country in the FBI while being erased by my own family. I wore this badge while being told I brought shame to their name. I saved lives while they laughed at mine. Someone whispered, "Damn," but I kept going. As of today, I am launching the Resilience Foundation, a support network and legal resource for FBI agents and other professionals whose careers have been sabotaged by personal betrayal, by families, spouses, even so-called friends. Because sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from enemies. They come from those who claim to love us. Cameras clicked like gunfire. Reporters shouted for questions. I let them. This time, I wasn't hiding. A young cadet, barely 19, stepped out from the back. His uniform was crisp, his face nervous, but his posture steady. He raised his hand in a salute. I returned it without a word. The room erupted, not in chaos, but in recognition. By the time I boarded my flight, the video had already gone viral. Headlines flooded every screen. FBI agent turns family betrayal into national mission. For once, my story wasn't theirs to twist. It was mine to tell. 2 weeks later, I stood in the briefing room at FBI headquarters. The walls gleamed with polished wood, the seal of the bureau heavy behind me. Rows of officials, analysts, and policymakers filled the seats, faces that carried both skepticism and curiosity. On the screen behind me glowed a simple title: The Resilience Protection Protocol. I took a steady breath. We prepare our agents for combat. For undercover stings. For terrorism. But what about betrayal? What about when the sabotage comes not from a criminal, but from your own family? From the people you're told will always protect you? The room was silent, listening. I clicked through the slides. Data. Retention rates. Complaints never escalated. Careers stalled because of rumors whispered in the wrong ears. We've lost good agents, I continued. Not to bullets. Not to bombs. But to betrayal hidden as loyalty. From the second row, Deputy Director Carter leaned forward, studying me closely. To his right, Assistant Director Hayes tapped notes into his tablet. At the back, I saw Harrison, his familiar steady gaze reminding me I wasn't alone. My proposal was clear. Immediate legal protection for agents facing false family sabotage. Psychological support to prevent quiet breakdowns. Career shielding so whispers could not stall promotions without evidence. When I finished, I stepped back from the lectern and let the silence hang. Not a weapon, just truth. Finally, Deputy Director Carter spoke. We'll fund it. It wasn't applause. It wasn't cheers. But it was enough. It was everything. Weeks later, I found myself standing in a modest community center. The banner behind me read, Resilience Foundation. We don't erase the wounded, we empower them. 30 people had gathered. Some in uniform. Some in plain clothes. All carrying scars no one else could see. A teenage girl raised her hand, voice trembling as she told me about her sister, discharged for being too emotional after reporting harassment. An older man spoke about his son, shamed into silence by a superior officer. I looked at them and said, You are not what they said you are. You are witnesses, and we don't shame witnesses anymore. We train them to lead. The room hummed, not with applause, but with recognition. With hope. Months later, I stood on a stage at a national symposium. Reporters filled the aisles, lawmakers and veterans in the front rows. Somewhere near the center, I spotted Brenda. My mother. No pearls this time. Just an old cardigan. She wept silently, but I didn't falter. Families are supposed to shield you, I said into the microphone. But sometimes, the betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from those who share your last name. And when it does, we must stop pretending it's private pain. It's a public wound. Gasps, nods, pen scratching furiously. I was once their secret, I continued. Now I am their sentence. The hall exhaled as one. And in the quiet that followed, I finally felt something I had chased for years. Not their approval, not their apology, but my own peace. Back at my small cottage near the coast, I painted as the waves crashed against the cliffs. No uniforms. No titles. Just me. Julia. A woman who had survived betrayal, and turned it into a weapon sharper than shame. Justice hadn't come through revenge. It came through presence. Through refusing to vanish. They once erased me. Now they spoke my name with care, because it weighed more than theirs. I closed my journal and whispered to the sea. I walked alone, but not lost. And for the first time I believed it. They tried to silence me. They tried to erase me. But in the end, my truth was louder than their lies. This wasn't just revenge. It was survival. And I made sure they would never forget my name again. I am Julia, and this was my story. If you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever been pushed into the shadows, remember, you are not alone. Justice may come late, but it comes. This is Revenge Repeat. Subscribe now, because every betrayal leaves a scar, and every scar tells a story.